webcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and good morning everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today. That is going to be all around managing unstructured data with data insight. So we have André Steyn from Veritas here who will be doing the webinar with you. And we also have Matt Compton from Bytes who will briefly discuss the relationship between Veritas and Bytes. So just before I pass over to Matt, I'm just going to go through a few housekeeping details with you. So you are all muted throughout the webinar today, but we'll hold a Q&A session at the end. So if you do have any questions, you can just pop those in the questions box and we will answer those for you at the end, or if you have any throughout the webinar, we'll read those out as well. We're also recording the webinar today, so I'll send you all a link to the recording this afternoon. And there's also a couple of questions at the end of the webinar today. So if you would like any further information, just pop that in there and one of our specialists will get back to you. Okay, so I'm now going to pass you over to Matt.
Thanks, Amy. My name's Matt. I look after the data center management and availability team at Bytes. Just want to do a quick intro of why we're doing today's webinar. So we've seen a huge amount of increase in the market for the last 18 months or so around unstructured data. It's always been a challenge for businesses to gain visibility of that, but with the fast approaching deadline for GDPR, people are really looking to invest in technologies that gives them visibility of data across your unstructured database. So Bytes have always been a very strong partner with Veritas, but what we've done over the last 18 months or so is work with a number of partners and vendors with solutions to be able to give you visibility. But what we've seen that when baking Veritas off with other players in the market coming in from a slightly different approach, Veritas teams to come out on top every time, and that's due to the granularity of the product and the visibility in the ease of use. So I'm not going to go into too much details, but I will be around at the end of the call for any Q&A. But I'll hand over to André, who's going to go into more details on the offering.
Okay, hello everybody. I'm just going to show my screen real quick. Okay, my name's André, as mentioned, with Veritas for the Information Government Solutions Engineer team. And today we're just going to be having a brief look at Data Insight and Enterprise Vault technical overview and how it can help you in your organization manage unstructured data. So we only have a short period of time together, so I'm going to get going on this and just briefly show you what we call the Global Database Report. And many of you may have seen this before, but what we're interested here is the dark data. So in the past, yes, it was all about not knowing what's there. So we're using a lot of storage up, and maybe there might be a bit of a security risk for data that shouldn't be there. But now, as mentioned, with the GDPR fast approaching, we really need to know what is sitting on our file servers, sitting on users' computers, on the email, and so on. And so if any of that data is personal data, A, we need a legal basis for processing that data. And B, we need to really know if there are any special categories of data. And there's a long list of special categories. And so if you don't have the legal basis for processing personal data in the first place, then you really shouldn't have the special categories. So we need to be able to find a way to identify this data and then decide what we're going to do next with that unstructured data. And so often it really is a case of, well, I've got some data and some servers, so I'm going to move it from the garage to the attic. It doesn't matter who has access to it. We're just going to kind of move it maybe onto some backups or into the cloud. But at the moment, it's not only the cost, but as mentioned, we really need to understand what the data is and especially who has access to it. So GDPR isn't just about processing personal data, it's about protecting it. And if you have the legal means and basis for processing personal data, then of course, as you know, we may get a subject access request after May, where a user requests his data, and he wants his data, and he might put in a request the means to be forgotten, the right to be forgotten. Okay, so in terms of what we're going to show you today, is data insights going to help you with the visibility in terms of exposing risk. And then from that, we can run some reports. We can understand what the data is, and we can classify it, and we can take action on it, and then also enforce governance potentially as well. Now, there are many Veritas products that are built into our 360 GDPR suite. I'm just going to show you two, potentially three if there's time today. The third one would be to do with a subject access request. So without any other ado, I just want to show you a couple of slides on data insight, just to understand what this product does. And then we'll go into a live demo and show you its capabilities. So on the slide here, you can see data insight has the capability of listening to real-life events from supported devices, and we're talking reads, writes, deletes, and that's very useful because it's a real-time event monitoring. And so from a security point of view, we can see who's accessed files, when they accessed it, and that's quite useful for the security team, especially the compliance team, when it comes to sensitive files or files with personal data in it. In terms of scanning, well, we can scan metadata and permissions. We don't actually open the file for this particular method, this function, and we can have a look at the permissions on the shares, who has permissions, and the product will provide recommendations as to potentially who should be removed from the shares as well. And in terms of metadata, we'll be able to see things like the size of the data and how long it's been not been accessed or not been modified for by means of some reports. So the information gathered on the particular shares and data in the cloud is where is the personal data? Who owns the data? And a big one that's going to be very important is who is responsible for remediation, and who has accessed the data. And we're not talking about even opening the file, or moving the file, just opening and reading the file. Who even has access, and also can we monitor data that is high risk, that we call sensitive data? And also, what's the usage frequency? Can we move some of this older data off our file shares into an archive solution, or even delete the data? So I am moving quite fast, folk. If you need to put any questions through, as mentioned, just pop them through, and we'll certainly address them. Okay, the information we can get from data insight is to be able to identify the data owner. That's quite important. Who's responsible, or who actually owns the data, and that is done by means of some settings in the product. The data custodian. Now, there's a couple of ways we can do that. We can either assign one, or we can, as I'm going to show you just now, send out an email with a link to something called the Selfservice portal, and that puts the onus on the head of department to go and decide who should have access to the shares. Now, even if the data custodian doesn't have access themselves, they are the head of a department, and they need to decide and take ownership of it. Big one for GDPR, and that's why I put it in red, is locate at-risk data. We want to be able to manage inactive data, so to classify and tag data, of course. And then we've got some advanced activity analytics, things like the social map, where we get to see people collaborating within shares and understand who our outliers are, the Edward Snowdens of the organization, who are perhaps dabbling into or having a look into file shares that don't normally collaborate in. And then we can also remediate permissions, and we can raise real-time alerts on shares that have sensitive data in. So it's almost like buying the brand new Land Rover Defender and just saying that I'm gonna only use it for 4x4ing. That's not true. You can do your school run. You can use it on weekends, go on holiday, and do your day-to-day driving in it as well. Well, same as this product. Yes, we're primarily focusing on GDPR, but it does appeal to the security teams, the compliance teams, legal, HR, and of course storage teams as well. And then one last slide before I go into my live demo, very briefly about the infrastructure. In a small environment, it is a single tier deployment, so you can have everything on one server. That's the management server, the indexer and collector. And of course, as you can see here, we can scale out for a larger environment. And on the right, you can see the collection sources that we have. So in terms of monitoring, scanning, collecting audit information, well, Windows file shares, of course, Documentum, more recently OneDrive, Box for a period of time, and EMSysler and NetApp, and so on. And so this is the basic infrastructure. So let's go and have a look at the product itself. Actually, before I do that, let me just one thing to mention here. One thing I like about this product is that it's quite easy to manage. So you manage it from one place. Although we do use database files, we use SQLite files, there isn't this large MySQL or SQL Server or Oracle database to manage and backup and so on. Backups are really easy, they're flat files, and it's a built-in database management system. And again, it's just folders that we need to back up. Okay, there we go. So hopefully everyone can see the screen. I'm now in the Data Insight Management console. And I want to first show you just real quick that it's all in one place. I can see all the shares that I've scanned, and I can manage the scanning from there. And for an administrator, it's really everything in one place. So you can see all the settings on the left. But to see the true power of it, let's go and have a look, first of all, at the workspace, which I'll show you first. I'll show you how we can look at it from a security point of view, and then a storage point of view. And then we'll take a look at classification, and then we'll take a look at a potential SAR request as well. And of course, we've got the very powerful reports that we can run. So in the workspace here, we see that we can monitor and have a look at any time the data sources, shares, and the users. So let's take a look at the data sources first. And just very briefly here, it's quite a small environment, but what you can see is the kind of shares, and one very clever piece of kit is that we can identify and monitor sensitive files. So the sensitive files could be added via integration with semantic DLP, data loss prevention, or simply creating a CSV file with a list of sensitive files, and we're going to monitor them and even potentially set up real-time alerts as to who's accessing those shares. So I'm going to go ahead and just show you the rest of this. So we can see who the owner is. Now that could have been added for a number of ways. The owner method, there we go. So it wasn't done manually, it was done by means of a calculation. How many folders, a risk score as well. We'll take a look at that in a second. How many open shares there are, sensitive files and active files. Okay, so we're in the security view at the minute. We'll get to the storage view in a second. And we can see there that we've tagged some files as well. So I'm going to expand the profile. Okay, so this is the overview. Let's go and take a look at the user activity. Now, of course, as I mentioned earlier, there are reports that you can run on this. You don't have to spend your whole day looking through this. There's a report on absolutely everything you see in here. But if you just wanted a quick look for any reason, for investigative purposes, perhaps you wanted to have a look at the permissions on the share, and if we can drill down per user as well, have a look at their accesses. We can look at the active users, their access events, and any potential inactive users as well. So all these users here are what we call inactive users. And is it possible that we could potentially remove them? Do they need to be on the share? We have a folder activity as well over a period of time. That's in the graphical. We can do it by date range. And we have the permissions on each share too. And then we can drill down to advanced permissions. So we can have a look at file share, access control list, share level permissions, and of course any recommendations on there. So if I take a look at the search and roll share, and there's some recommendations. So we see there that there's an old SID sitting in there that's potentially from a user that's left, or a couple of them actually. We could remove those for security reasons. It could be that the all users group has permissions on a share as well, like the HR share or sensitive share. And there's a couple of things you can do here. So by clicking apply changes, I could have pre-configured in the settings either an email to be sent to the administrator, who can then initiate a change request, have it done, or I can write a custom script. So that could be done via Perl or PowerShell or something like that, and that custom script could potentially actually go and create the action itself. Okay, let's take a look at the audit logs. I'm going back to my share HR. Okay, let's take a look at if I've got anything in your file. There we go, folder activity, and then we've got, of course, the very clever social map. So the social map is a nice piece of kit, and what it does is it allows us to see who's collaborating on the share and look for weakly connected users and outliers. So we can see each person collaborating on a particular share, when they had access, what kind of files we could potentially drill down to each person, and view the audit logs for that particular person. And I'm just going to bring up a picture. It's not very impressive here. This was created in response to the Edward Snowden case I mentioned earlier. And if you just give me 1 second. Okay, so this is kind of a bigger example. And this is what you typically see on your file shares. This comes as part of the product. You don't have to pay extra for this. And you could zoom in and you see the various users, and you can see there's this user sitting in there, and he could be an outlier, because if you had a look at this in the product itself, you'll see lines from this user going to shares that he doesn't normally collaborate in. We could then investigate that user and see which shares he's actually accessing. That would be called an outlier, and that would be definitely something to indeed investigate. Okay. In addition, if a particular share has been accessed, or some files have been stolen from the company, they've been leaked out into the industry, then we can identify right down to the actual file and the access event of when that file was actually accessed, okay, and which users accessed it, and so on. So in terms of staying on security just for 1 second, we'll take a look at the user tab. And here we can see the users that have access and potential on the shares. And we have something called a risk analysis or risk score and a risk dossier. So if I take Sarah James, for example, we can see that she hasn't had any activity on various filers, and suddenly there's a peak in activity. So let's expand her profile there. Okay, and we're going to have a look at this particular shares here. And we'll be able to see what effective permissions she has on the shares, right down to individual folders. We'll be able to see her file system access control list if she had one. Just go back up to there. Share level permissions and any activity that she's had on that particular folder over time. Right down to which file she accessed and the type of access event that she had. So that could have been an attempted delete, it could have been a read or a write. So right down to the second, and that's particularly useful in an investigative area. If we take a real quick look at the risk dossier, again, this user doesn't have any anomalies, but suddenly there's a peak in access over a period of time. Let's go and take a look there. And we can see exactly which shares this user has been accessing over a period of time, and even sensitive shares. So we'll drill down inside there, and these are sensitive files that she's been accessing. So from a security point of view, there's a lot of investigative opportunities within this product and features. Let's go back to the dashboard. From just staying on security for a second, now we're just going to have a quick look at the classification feature. So in Data Insight 6.1 above, we have the built-in Veritas information classification engine, or information classification engine. And as you can see here, we have a number of predefined rules that match most countries' personal data or various regulatory bodies. And I've enabled the ones that would potentially match the GDPR rules, so personal information. And let's give you an example of what this does. So I'm going to select the UK personal data policy. And on the right here, you can see what it does. So if it matches any of these conditions that we see down here, then what we're going to do is tag the file as personal identifiable information. So from a GDPR perspective, we want to be able to identify files that contain personal data. And each of these conditions could have something like a regular expression, so a regex that matches various forms of numbers, so passport numbers and so on. And we could even create our custom one. So if you had a specific line proximity search that you wanted to do, a number within 5 words of a particular phrase or a word, you could indeed create those. You can create your own customizable information tags and policies as well. And what we have here as well is the ability to test a file, just maybe a test file to check if it actually works against our file shares. So there's a number of ways we can indeed classify data. So let's say, for example, we wanted to use the Workspace. What we could do is identify a share that might contain data, and we'd simply go down the actions list and we'd say classify. That would then send it through to the classification engine. And then what we'd be able to do is we'd see the result of that in the Workspace and of course in the reports as well. So let's drill down in a little bit here. Okay, and as you can see, if we've got any tags there, they would be tagged at the bottom there, and we can filter out by tags as well. Okay, so the classification engine, it's one way we could do it. I'll show you another way in a second, and that is in the reports. So in the reports section itself, you'll notice that there's a number of reports that would match the security, the storage admins. So you could potentially do a report inactivity data by owner, inactive folders, filer utilization, and so on and so forth. And I will show you how you would set up a report in a minute. I'm just going to show you a couple of slides for the sake of time on some reports that have already been run. So this one, for example, is a screenshot taken from the actual report, which can be run in CSV, HTML, and in DQL as well. Okay, and we can see this is a data aging report, and this comes from a real customer. And we notice there that we found a lot of inactive data by file types. Some data that was older than 48 months. We can report on data that has been classified, so either from the Workspace or at the remediation section of a report. In this example here, we had 205,000 files that were classified. And a lot of them, as you can see there, were files that you wouldn't normally think about. You can see a lot of the files were SQL dumps, documents, high-density personal information, and a lot of banking files as well. Credit card information. Okay. And in this case, they even created a custom tag to be able to identify personal information that was specific to this particular customer. And then a detailed sample, we're able to see not only when that the data was classified, but when it was last modified. So what you should be thinking right now is, well, if I'm not sure if I've got the legal basis for processing it, my next step should be to identify this data and to potentially delete it or move it off to a product, an archiving product that has a retention on it. Okay, and then one big one was this report allowed them to have a look at the stale data, and this is the data that we're going to delete. And a lot for each department, we can see there that 43 gigabytes just in this small share, this test share that they ran the reports against. So this is an example of a report of old stale data. We can do it by file type. We can do it by department. We can do it by users. And again, we can see there's the usual suspect there, backup and archive files. Normally we get a lot of things like PST files, video files as well, graphic files, and so on. So these are the kind of reports that you can run. So if you just want to run a basic report without the agent, you can still report on inactive file types, consumption by file types, but with the agent, as I mentioned earlier, we get our data access events. So we get user anomalies, we get that security view I showed you just now, the risk dossier, and so on. And just a couple more very basic data aging reports. We can see the age of data, inactive data, and data type as well. So a lot of the times when we run this in customers, we find a lot of, as I mentioned earlier, PST files, and we find a lot of graphics files. And then just final report I wanted to show you here was a user access summary report as well on particular paths. Okay, as I mentioned there, these users could be a risk. So what I'm going to do now is just show you the capabilities of the reports. So it could be that you wanted to find data that's already been classified. And what we have is a number of predefined DQL reports, very similar to SQL. And interestingly enough, you'll notice in there as well, we also have some reports to identify the source of any ransomware attack. I'm just going to choose the classification, and there's some templates. So we could report on classified files with a specific extension. Let's select that one, or a summary, and you'll notice there's a particular query. You can modify the query if you wanted to add additional columns. Go ahead and validate that. We can then have that sent via email. We can even schedule these reports. Any of these reports you see there, daily, weekly, or monthly. So again, you don't have to sit in the workspace to try and figure out what data you have. You simply run the reports. So let's say we've identified some shares with data that have been classified, and at the same time, they haven't been accessed or modified within a number of years. Well, what we can do then is we can take action on those. And I'm going to show you Enterprise Vault in a second, but we can archive these items, send them through to Enterprise Vault, and then choose to delete the file off the file share. We can create an offline placeholder, which is a transparent file, transparent to the end user. When he double clicks it, he gets the file brought back to the original location. Or we could just leave it alone, perhaps if you just wanted to index the file and delete it later. And we'll see the advantages of sending this through to Enterprise Vault in a second. One good thing about it as well, we can also add a custom index property to it. If there's a specific index property you wanted to add, such as something like an X header that you had inside a file, and a file that had come from an email source, SMTP email, or any other property type that we wanted to add. So let's say date, or even a classification property. For example, if you had compliance accelerator, we could add an inclusion rule here as well. Okay, and then we'd be able to get those reports out in CSV, or we could query it as well. So I don't know if there's any questions so far, folk. Has anything come through?
Hi, Andre. Just have a quick look. I don't think we've got any questions just yet. 1 second. No, there's no questions just yet. So yeah, if you do have any questions at all, there is a questions box just at the right-hand side of your screen, so you can pop those in there throughout. Oh, actually, hold on, one's just come through. So this one's from Stephen. Can it be used to find files for a subject access request?
Absolutely. So when I say to find files, what we'll be doing is let me get to this in a sec, because that was going to be my next subject after this, is what do you do in terms of a subject access request? And I'm going to combine a number of products for that. So good question. I'm coming to that in a second. Good. Anything else for what we've just covered prior to this? Okay. So I just wanted to show you real quick the storage view. This is in the Workspace again, and we can now see a slightly different view here. There's things like inactive files, size of each file share. And then again, we can drill down, have a look at folder activity for a period of time, user activity, and potentially an overview as well. And you can create your custom views inside there. If you wanted to identify files from here that haven't been accessed for a period of time, we can also choose to archive them directly from the Workspace. If I just go back to data sources. So we've got 9 inactive files over there. It looks like some pretty old stuff. Simply check the box, go to actions, and we can then choose for the individual files to archive them. Okay, right, so the question came up is the subject access request. Well, perhaps before I get onto that directly, I just want to briefly show you. So we've been talking about this archiving to Enterprise Vault. So what is Enterprise Vault? Well, in brief, it's an archiving solution, very powerful one, where we can archive a number of sources. So we can archive from the SMTP journal, the traditional journaling, Exchange, public folder file systems, internet mail, shared, and a number of other sources as well. So things like your file shares, your NFS shares, Unix shares. We have a number of partners, and we have an API. And the powerful thing about the Enterprise Vault is that we will also classify it, and we can create custom rules. And then, of course, we have a very powerful indexing engine. So what you're looking at here, I'm a special user with permissions across the board, and I can see from one place everything that's been archived and indexed: journaling, file shares, SharePoint, email, and anything else. And we can classify it. If you take a look there, we've classified a number of items, but we can also search on it with some powerful search tools. So from an end user perspective, if you've decided to archive a lot of send through the files to Enterprise Vault from your file share, you could either leave behind a placeholder or simply give your users this. And if you've got email archiving as well, it's everything in one place. Everything the user's allowed to see, everything he has access to, he will see in this one place, and he can then do a number of searches. If he wants, he can export it as well. If you choose, you can block this functionality or allow it, and so on. One other powerful thing that Enterprise Vault does, and this comes down to that GDPR again, is, let me go back to DI for 1 second. So perhaps what I've identified in here, so let's go to my data sources. I'm going to go to server 1. I'm going to go to the HR share. And in the HR share, Data Insight has classified a number of files in here, but they're JPEGs, PNGs, and so on. So if it comes down to a subject access request, we'll be able to look at the metadata, but we're not going to be able to classify the file content because, again, it doesn't contain any text. We could create a classification custom rule, that says if in the subject it has something like password or ID, certainly then it would work, or if we had a particular file extension. But once we've identified the data, then we can decide what to do with it next. And I'm going to show you two different ways. So let's say this file share, we've definitely identified that they've been tagged as PI or passport information. What do we do with it? Well, we've sent it through to Enterprise Vault by means of the archiving action, perhaps in the report. In Enterprise Vault, we have very powerful OCR tools. So we can OCR a number of files, and what that does, it extracts the text from it, and then will classify the text. So classify based on any rules you have. So if I've got the UK personal classification rule enabled and it contains passport information, it will then classify it and make that text searchable as well. In addition, it's also going to extract hidden text. So we're talking color obfuscated text. A lot of personal data could also be in hidden spreadsheet data. You know, a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll take a SQL server or Oracle server database, and they'll dump the contents onto a CSV file or Excel spreadsheet or Word document. And a lot of the time that they'll have hidden cells and hidden spreadsheets in there. We're certainly going to index that. So let's go back to my search over here, and I'm going to take a look now at the passports and visas that has been sent through from the data insight. And as you can see there, this is a picture of text. Enterprise Vault has OSI Audit, and we can see it's tagged it correctly as personal data and UK passport. And if I just do a simple search here and look for we can see that I'm typing in a particular name. Now that's a picture of text, but we have indeed OSI Audit. So I could then find the information in there as well. Okay, so we've identified where the personal data is. Well, there's a number of things you can do from here. Simply using Enterprise Vault, if you really wanted to. Let's just go back. We could, of course, simply go like this, and we could then export to a zip file. Okay, however, I'm just going to show you another product that plugs in to here. And it's called Discovery Accelerator. So again, talking about that Lone Driver Defender, you know, it's not just going to be subject access requests. What I found these days is that a lot of law firms, companies, banks, and so on, they're still using the old-fashioned method of investigating data, whether that be the SAR request from the current Data Protection Act, or whether it be an internal investigation or anything like that. They're still using the old method of extracting a PSD file, and then what they do with that is they go and review it in Outlook. Now that's not ideal, so I'm going to show you two tools. I'm just having a look at time real quick. So this is Discovery Accelerator, and it kind of looks at the Enterprise Vault archives. And so what I've got here, just for the sake of time, is a subject access request. So from Data Insight, we've pushed the potential personal data. That could come from a file share, that could come from your SMTP journal, that could come from the email. It doesn't matter where it comes from. Okay, and I'm going to, from this, typically the compliance, HR, legal teams, they would have access to this tool. And without leaving their desk, they can create a new search. So I'm going to do here, say, so for the sake of time, there's not a lot of time to go through all this, but let's say we were looking for a particular data from a particular custodian. I don't have any in that moment. So to or from John Smith or something like that. But if I just choose the archive here, typically we would search across. But I'm just going to do the one for time. Okay, and let's go and take a look at policies. So we're going to say to Discovery Accelerator, I want you to go and find anything with any of these particular tags. We could, of course, say all or none. And the main ones I'm interested really in here is the PI information and potentially UK passports. So let's go and see what this gives us. So now running a search against the archives in Enterprise Vault. Okay, see we've got 6 there. Now, before I've even accepted that data, I can go and have a quick look. Before accepted, I can drill down, because you're going to expect to have maybe thousands of hits. So I'm going to go and see there what I found. Date ranges. We can also then group it by a number of other fields, date and so on. And we can have a quick look as well. So there's an HTML view, and we can actually take a look at the actual data as well. Good, so I'm more good with that. And what I'm going to do, go ahead there, and as I'm going to accept that search, that goes into something called review. And then what I can do there is create some additional tags if I want to. We have a deduplication feature. So we can review it. You can imagine if you've got thousands, hundreds of thousands of items to shift through, we can then do a search within here and very quickly identify the data we're looking for. Again, we have the fields. And then what we can do after that is run an export in production and simply say what I'm going to do here is I want to export all items with a particular policy, or if we've marked, say, as relevant, you can create your own custom marks. We could have it in an HTML, so that's quite useful for a SAR request. We don't want to give them the original file, you see, and we can include other information there. We could even zip it as well. So I know that did that quite fast, but that in brief was a very quick idea of a data subject access request. Bearing in mind that when you do your searches, you don't have to restrict it to one archive. It could be a search for those tags that Enterprise Vault has created in the search across all the archives. So that is SharePoint, Office 365, any particular source that we've archived from. So I'll just stop there real quick before I show you one final product. How am I doing for time there, Amy?
Hi, Andre. Yep, so we've kind of maybe about 10 minutes left. Is that okay?
Excellent. Good. So one final thing I want to show you in Data Insight before I show you how another way you could handle a subject access request is something very clever that plugs into Data Insight. Well, it's part of the product actually, and it's called an entitlement review. So, and the self-service portal. So what we do in the product is we create these entitlement reviews, and we perhaps have identified who the data custodian is, who's the potential head of department, or who should own the data, who's responsible for the data in the event that there is a SAR request, in the event that there is a data leakage or some investigation on the share. So we create these, an email is automatically sent to these people. And what they then do, once they've clicked the link, this is just one of the many, they'll get something like this. You can imagine now the head of department, and first thing is he'll say, well, yeah, I am the head or not, so he'll decline it, or he can delegate. And it gives them a list of the people in the organization that have access. And then he can say, well, this particular user should not have access and certainly not full control. So you can imagine the HR shares, the legal shares, the shares that contain the personal data that you really should be protecting. And then after that, that could be invoked into an email, a change request, or you can run a custom script, which probably the company won't do, but it is possible to actually revoke the share information as well on the share, on the parent folder. So that's what we call an entitlement review. We can also do one that's ownership confirmation. We can create one that relates to incident remediation and records classification. Okay. Right. Now I've got a couple of minutes to show you another way of doing a SAR request, and it's with our e-discovery platform. That's end-to-end e-discovery. So again, using data insight, we've identified and classified the shares that contain personal data. We've identified who should and shouldn't have access to them by means of the reports. And now let's show you how we could quickly do a SAR request using e-discovery platform. Okay, so this particular one here, we've created a request called this SAR, and I'm just going to go to, where is it? Data analytics. Okay, and you can see that, whoops, sorry, I do apologize. We've, it's a very, very powerful and feature-rich tool, so there's no time to go through it all. But what we're going to show you here is, first of all, the collection capability. Okay, so in this one here, let's choose quite a big one. For a particular SAR request, we can collect with this product from most data sources from one without leaving your seat, so from one interface. So here we can collect from those Enterprise Vault archives. We can collect from SharePoint, Office 365, file shares, computers that are on the network, computers that are off the network, with an on-site collector, and we can very quickly find the data for the SAR request. These tasks can be scheduled, so you can have an ongoing process of looking for data. But let's say that we've collected data from a number of different sources. It's very quick after that. What we could then do is go and analyze the data. By document type, by custodian. And then we can choose what to include and what not to include. So potentially, we would then create a set. We would process that with our very powerful processing engine. And then after that, and this is really the creme de la creme of the review tools that are out there in the market, and is the preferred tool. So I've had the privilege of working with a lot of different large top 5 companies that deal with data and e-discovery searches, investigations, subpoenas, and so on. So it really is the preferred tool. There's a number of things you can do in here. I'm just going to show you a couple of things. Just wait for this to come up. It's the first time I'm running it since booting up. One of the features I'm going to show you quick is, again, we have the classification in here. So we can say, go and find the items that Data Insight has identified as personal data. And we're going to collect it very quickly. And here's the classification result. It is a US example, but let's just say it was UK as well. So we've identified 8 items with social security number. And what we can also do with these is we can redact them. Let's go and take a look there. So not only can we redact inside the case, but we can redact as well across the case. We look at the native image, and I'm going to go to the redactions themselves. So if it was some personal data in there, let's just find another one. We could then choose to redact text. We could find and redact privacy information. Now, this is proper machine redaction. It's not where you hold it up to the light, where there's been a black pen and you can kind of see the text underneath. Absolutely not. So this is proper redaction machine, and it is accepted around the world. You can do a find and redact as well. We can annotate. So potentially, if you needed to create some additional annotations on their texts, strike throughs, and so on and so forth, you could do that. But if for a potential STAR request, often what the case is that we have personal data, and let's just find here, see if we've got anything there, and that it's often part of other people's or other employees' personal data or other customers' personal data. So it might be that we need to redact just some of the items inside there. when we have a SAR request, and only show them the stuff that they need to see. So what do you do once you've redacted it? Well, what you do next is you go ahead and you produce it. And again, for the sake of time, let's just see if I've got my, and this is what it creates. So your image files. So in this case, it was a social security number. Let's go and take a look at one that's got social security number in it. There it is. So this is the final result. And what you'll notice in here is that the redactions will also contain the reason for the redaction on there. So the subject access request in this case took a very short period of time, and this is what we're going to hand off to the end user as well. Now, the good news about it in the latest version is we don't need to include any other documents, only the items of interest and only the items that we want to produce to the end user. And this is imaged. You can't undo, you can't remove that redaction like you can with other redaction products. So that's a brief look at some of the things you can do with this product. One thing I had last week was some customer, and he said, well, we've got some personal data in audio files. Well, that's no problem with this product as well, because we can also search on audio phrases, spoken phrases. It uses phonemes, and so we can then search on the review screen. Is amazing. It takes you to the actual file, and whether it's a video file or audio, it doesn't matter, and it takes you 3 seconds before the phrase or the word, and allows you then to review that actual audio. So that's just some of the things that we can do with the eDiscovery platform in terms of a SAR request. Any questions, folk?
Let me just have a look 1 second. No questions so far.
I believe I'm out of time. Is that right?
But you can carry on if you still got to finish up. We've got a few minutes if you'd like to carry on.
That's pretty much an overview of all the products. I did leave some time if anyone wanted to go back and I know I covered a lot in a short time. I do apologize, but if anyone wants me to cover anything, again, any of the 3 products or technical questions.
One question has popped up. How is DI licensed?
That's a good question, and I'll show you. Okay, so the license is based on active users, monitored users. So we got total users license and total users monitored. And so this is what we do is we have a kind of a starter pack. The self-service portal is an additional license, and that covers, doesn't matter how many users, as long as you use it, or rather use it up to the amount that you see above. And then we have a cloud storage license as well, which is also per user. In terms of costing, that would be a discussion for Bytes, as I understand.
Thanks, Andre. And there's another question here. It's asked about video searches.
Yeah. Okay. So video searches, so what it does, it will extract the audio from the video, and you'll be able to watch it. Let's see if I've real quickly got a case with video in. You're not going to be able to hear this here, unfortunately, but let's just see, nice and review. Yeah, so we do have a number of supported. So the normal ones, the normal MP4s, we've got MOV files and so on. So for example, this was used in the US recently for CCTV with audio, and a conversation was had that needed to be recorded. I mean, we're talking Mifid 2 as well, conversations with audio, and sometimes with video. So if you were capturing your WebEx calls, recordings, and it was in a format that was supported, absolutely we could. And I don't have any in this particular environment. I'm happy to set up a separate webinar just to cover eDiscovery and that kind of thing as well if you need. But certainly we can do video files. Sorry.
Thanks, Andre.
Was that the question, or did you want to know the exact files that were supported? I can bring that up if you need.
Just wait to see if Imran will elaborate on that.
Okay, so how it would work, just while I'm waiting for that, typically, so the good thing about this is it uses phonemes. So phonemes, if you remember from when you were in kindergarten, so the North American language only has 40 phonemes. So again, when you type in a word, it would be how it sounds, not how it's potentially spelled. So the number 2, you'd say T-O-O or T-W-O. Let's see if I can pick up some phrases in this particular lab. I do have a lab that has Chinese, Polish, English, North American, my dodgy accent, and it has a few others as well. I can't remember. Oh yeah, Swiss German, and I can show you that maybe for another WebEx. Let's just see if I got the American one. Yeah, I don't think this has a sound device on this particular lab. I've got some Moby Dick in there. So for a reviewer, it's really easy. What they would do is they would come in here. It might actually work. Let's try. They would see the phrases. Now you could type in a whole sentence there. This score's pretty high. So in fact, let me do a better search there. So I'm going to include. I'm just going to do some other ones here because Moby Dick certainly has whale. And if anyone else can think of any phrases from Moby Dick, we can put an entire sentence in there. Let's go and see what our results are. So as I was saying, it's based on phonemes, so it doesn't create a transcript, because products that create a transcript are definitely technically inaccurate, and it doesn't use up much space. And I processed 100 hours of audio, and it took 20 minutes. So it was very, very quick, and that was on a laptop. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a sound card on here, but what you could see there is it doesn't matter if it's video or audio. It will take you to 3 seconds before the start time, and it would let you play and pause and to hear if that's the phrase. You would then be able to export that file in its native format. Typically, if you're doing this for a SAR request or any other e-discovery process, you would have to give it a little bit of context. So you might need to edit the file if it contains sensitive data. Unfortunately, we don't have a redaction feature for audio or video, but it's pretty easy to do. Yeah, and of course we have the score as well. The higher the score, the more likely it is that the higher the confidence level that it is actually that word. Okay, so that's quite a nice feature.
Brilliant, thanks, Andre.
Excellent.
So I think that's all the questions that we have for today. So thank you, Andre, for presenting, and thank you everyone for joining as well today. As mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, there is a feedback form at the end, just a couple of questions. So if you'd like any further information, just pop that in there, and one of our specialists will be in touch with you. I'll also send you the link to the recording, hopefully this afternoon, if not tomorrow morning. And there is also our email address if you'd like to submit any questions outside of the webinar today. Okay, so thanks everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day today. Thank you.